On September 2nd, 31st BC, the fate of the Roman world was decided. It was decided not in the grand halls of the Senate, but on the shimmering waters of the Ionian Sea. The Battle of Actium, off the western coast of Greece, delivered a crushing victory. The winner was a young, calculating man named Octavian. His victory was absolute. His enemy, the famous general Mark Antony, and the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, were defeated. This single naval clash did more than end a war. It ended an entire era. The Roman Republic, a system of shared power that had lasted for nearly 500 years, was over. Rome would now become an empire, and Octavian would be its first emperor. The battle was the dramatic final act of a long and bloody power struggle. For years, Rome had been torn apart by civil wars. Great men with vast armies had fought for control, leaving scars across the Mediterranean. The contest narrowed to two individuals: Octavian, adopted son and heir of the murdered Julius Caesar. After Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BC, Rome was plunged into chaos. Power was up for grabs. From the turmoil, three men emerged to form the Second Triumvirate: Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son. He was only 18, but shrewd, patient, and utterly ruthless. He had Caesar's name and the loyalty of Caesar's veteran soldiers. Mark Antony, a seasoned general and a man of great appetites. A brilliant soldier, loved by his troops, but impulsive and dramatic. He saw himself as Caesar's natural successor. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a powerful politician and former ally of Caesar. His influence would soon fade, leaving two titans, Octavian and Antony. To avoid another civil war, they divided the Roman territories between them. Octavian took Italy and the western provinces. Antony took the wealthy and glamorous eastern provinces. Greece, Asia Minor, Syria. It was practical, but it created two separate spheres of power. It set the stage for a collision. Each man built his own base, consolidated power, and eyed the other with growing suspicion. Antony's base was in the east, where he renewed ties with Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra, no ordinary monarch, intelligent, multilingual, a masterful political operator. She had been Julius Caesar's lover and had borne him a son, Caesarion. Now she and Antony were allies and lovers. Cleopatra provided Antony with the immense wealth of Egypt, gold grain ships. In return, Antony offered her Roman military protection and the promise of a restored and powerful Egyptian kingdom for her and her children. Their union was a formidable one. This alliance deeply worried Octavian back in Rome. He saw it not as a partnership, but as a dangerous entanglement. Antony was adopting Eastern customs, appearing more like an Oriental monarch than a Roman magistrate. In 34 BC, he held the donations of Alexandria. In public, he declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings, and her son Caesarion the true heir of Julius Caesar. He granted vast territories to the children he had with Cleopatra. For Octavian, whose legitimacy rested on being Caesar's sole heir, this was an intolerable challenge. Before the first arrow was fired at Actium, a different kind of war was already raging. It was a war of words, images, ideas. Octavian, a master of political messaging, launched a brilliant propaganda campaign from Rome. His target was not just Antony, but the woman beside him, Cleopatra. He understood that Romans were deeply suspicious of powerful women and deeply fearful of foreign influence. He painted Cleopatra as a wicked, decadent sorceress who had bewitched a noble Roman general. He spread stories of her lavish lifestyle, her strange gods, and her ambition to rule Rome from her throne in Alexandria. This was a powerful and effective strategy. Octavian presented himself as the defender of traditional Roman values. He was the protector of the Republic, family. Antony, in contrast, was portrayed as a man who had abandoned his Roman wife, Octavia, for a foreign mistress. This was a personal insult, but Octavian framed it as a national disgrace. He made Antony's personal choices seem like a betrayal of Rome itself. He circulated rumors that Antony planned to move the capital of the empire to Egypt. The idea of taking orders from a foreign queen, and an Egyptian one at that, was horrifying to the Roman elite. Fear was Octavian's most powerful weapon. The campaign reached its peak in 32 BC. Octavian took a dramatic and legally questionable step. He forcibly entered the temple of the Vestal Virgins in Rome and seized Antony's will. He then read its contents aloud to the Senate and the public. The will reportedly confirmed some of the Romans' worst fears. It affirmed the territorial gifts to Cleopatra's children. It declared Caesarion as Caesar's true son. Most damningly, it stated Antony's wish to be buried in Alexandria alongside Cleopatra. This was the final proof for many. Antony had turned his back on Rome completely. He was no longer one of them. This act galvanized support for Octavian. The Senate, swayed by the public outrage he had manufactured, stripped Antony of his official powers. Crucially, Octavian declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. This was a stroke of genius. It framed the conflict as a foreign war, a legitimate defense of Rome against an external enemy. Senators, soldiers, citizens. Were they fighting for their general, or were they fighting for a foreign queen against their own homeland? Many abandoned Antony's cause before the real fighting even began. The final confrontation was inevitable. Antony and Cleopatra gathered their massive fleet and army at Actium, on the coast of western Greece. Their navy was enormous, numbering around 500 warships. Many of these were massive quinqueremes. Even larger vessels existed, some with 8 banks of oars. Some even had 10 banks of oars. They were like floating fortresses, designed for close-quarters fighting. Their plan was to use their size and numbers to ram. Their plan was also to board the enemy ships, turning the sea battle into a series of land battles on floating decks. Antony's soldiers were experienced legionaries, and he was confident in their ability to fight. Cleopatra's Egyptian fleet, numbering about 60 ships, was a crucial part of this force. Her ships were fast and well-manned, and they carried the vast treasury that was funding the entire war effort. Her presence, however, was a double-edged sword. While her resources were essential, her command role reinforced Octavian's propaganda that this was a war against a foreign queen. Many of Antony's Roman officers were uncomfortable taking orders from her, and they resented her influence over their general. This created a subtle but significant fissure in Antony's command structure, a weakness that would later prove fatal. Octavian's forces were commanded by Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa was perhaps the greatest admiral of his generation. He had assembled a fleet of around 400 ships. What they lacked in size, they made up for in design and tactics. Agrippa favored smaller, more agile vessels called Liburnians. These ships were faster, easier to maneuver, and crewed by sailors who were exceptionally well-trained. Agrippa's strategy was not to meet Antony's heavy ships head-on. Instead, he planned to use his fleet's mobility to outmaneuver the enemy, use ranged weapons like catapults and ballistae. Before the main battle, Agrippa executed a campaign to cripple Antony's position. He used his faster fleet to blockade the Gulf of Ambracia, where Antony's fleet was anchored. He also captured key supply points along the Greek coast, cutting off Antony's army from food and reinforcements. As the summer wore on, Antony's camp was struck by disease and starvation. Morale plummeted. Deserters fled to Octavian's side daily. Antony was trapped. His massive army and navy were slowly withering away. He was left with a desperate choice: try to break out by sea, or face the slow, certain defeat of a siege. He chose the sea. Well, that was his decision. The morning of September 2nd, 31 BC, dawned with a light haze over the Ionian Sea. Antony's fleet began to move out of the narrow strait and into the open water. His plan was a gamble: to break through Agrippa's blockade and escape to the south, hopefully to regroup in Egypt. He arranged his heavy ships in a dense crescent formation, a wall of wood and bronze aimed at the center of Agrippa's line. The sea was calm at first. For hours, the two fleets simply watched each other. Neither commander wanted to make the first move. The tension was immense. The fate of hundreds of thousands of men and of Rome itself hung in the balance. Around noon, a sea breeze picked up, filling the sails of Antony's ships. This was the moment. Antony's fleet surged forward and the battle began. They avoided direct ramming attacks. They circled, firing arrows, stones from catapults, pots of burning pitch. Antony's ships were difficult to sink. Their oars could be smashed, their crews picked off from a distance. The battle became a chaotic, swirling melee. The air filled with the splintering of wood, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded. Then, at a critical moment in the battle, something unexpected happened. A squadron of ships at the rear of Antony's line suddenly hoisted its sails and broke away from the engagement. It was Cleopatra's squadron, the queen herself on her flagship, the Antonia. With the wind now in their favor, they sailed south, away from the fight. Their objective was clear: escape. They carried the war treasury. Perhaps Cleopatra believed the battle was lost and decided to save herself and her wealth. We will never know her exact reasoning, but her action had immediate and devastating consequences for the battle. When Antony, fighting in the heart of the battle, saw Cleopatra's ships fleeing, he made a fateful choice. He abandoned his flagship, transferred to a smaller, faster ship, and pursued her. He left his men, his fleet, his command behind. For the soldiers who witnessed their general deserting them in the middle of a battle, the effect was catastrophic. For the sailors who witnessed it, the effect was catastrophic. Morale shattered instantly. Some commanders continued to fight bravely, but without leadership and a clear strategy, their resistance began to crumble. One by one, Antony's ships were surrounded, overwhelmed, captured, destroyed. The great fleet was annihilated. The victory at Actium was total. Agrippa's tactical brilliance, the catastrophic failure of Antony's command, had delivered Octavian the world. Antony and Cleopatra escaped with a handful of ships, but their military power was broken forever. Most of Antony's land army watched from shore and surrendered to Octavian within a week. The war was effectively won that single afternoon. All that remained was for Octavian to consolidate power and eliminate his rivals for good. He spent the next year securing the eastern provinces, ensuring their loyalty. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria, hopes shattered. They knew Octavian would follow. Their final months were desperate and despairing. Octavian's legions arrived outside Alexandria in summer 30th BC. Antony's remaining forces deserted him. Hearing a false report that Cleopatra had killed herself, Antony fell on his own sword. He was brought, dying, to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had taken refuge, and he died in her arms. A tragic end for one of Rome's greatest soldiers. Cleopatra's fate was sealed. She was captured by Octavian's men. Octavian intended to take her back to Rome and parade her in his triumph, the ultimate symbol of victory over the East. But Cleopatra refused humiliation. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a descendant of kings, and she chose to die a queen. According to the famous story, she had a poisonous asp, a symbol of Egyptian royalty, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. She died by its bite, defiant to the end. With her death, the 300-year-old Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Egypt became a personal province of Rome. Antony and Cleopatra, dead Caesarion, hunted and killed. There were no more rivals. He was the undisputed master of the Roman world. He returned to Rome in 29 BC and celebrated a magnificent 3-day triumph. But he was careful. He knew Romans hated the title of king, so he began a slow, careful transformation of the state. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. He presented himself not as a dictator, but as the princeps or first citizen. He restored the republic in name, but in reality he held all the power. The age of Augustus, the Roman Empire, had begun. The Battle of Actium was more than just a military victory. It was one of the most significant turning points in Western history. Its most immediate consequence was the end of the Roman Republic. The chaotic, often violent system of competing aristocrats was replaced by the rule of one man. Octavian, now Augustus, brought an end to a century of civil war. He established a period of unprecedented peace and stability that would last for over 200 years, a time later known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For millions around the Mediterranean, this meant security, prosperity, the rule of law. This new order came at a cost. The political freedoms of the old republic were gone. While the Senate continued to meet, it had no real power. Elections became a formality. The emperor, with his control over the army, the treasury, the law, was the ultimate authority. But the voice of the Roman citizen was diminished. Power flowed from the top down. The legacy of actium was the trade of liberty for security, a bargain that would define the Roman Empire. The battle also solidified a cultural divide between West and East that would linger for centuries. Octavian's victory was seen as the triumph of sober, disciplined Roman values over the perceived decadence and luxury. Poets and historians in the age of Augustus, like Virgil, Horace, celebrated actium as the moment Rome was saved from foreign corruption. This narrative shaped how Romans saw themselves and their place in the world. The story of Antony and Cleopatra became a cautionary tale about the dangers of passion and the loss of one's Roman identity, a story that has captivated artists and writers ever since. Ultimately, the events of that one day at Actium set the course for the next 500 years of European history. It created the Roman Empire, the political and cultural entity that would spread its language, laws, architecture across 3 continents. The decisions made on the decks of those ships, Agrippa's cunning tactics, Cleopatra's desperate flight, Antony's fatal choice to follow her, had consequences far beyond what any of them could have imagined. A young man's ambition, a queen's will to survive, a general's moment of weakness, all converged on a single afternoon. The result was the end of one world and the birth of another.